Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins. We are on chapter 34. It's a little long. We might do it in two parts. I'm not sure though. We'll see. We'll see how fast we get going and what all is happening in the courtroom here. All right, chapter 34. At Mrs. Bowen's impassioned cry, remember last time she was like, Ellis, Ellis, it's me, I'm Hagar. All right. At Mrs. Bowen's impassioned cry, Chief Henson turned an appealing look upon the judge. Oh, sorry. I had a note to myself that said, I am so slow. And I was like, Henson, Benson, Ensign. I hadn't made the connection before, and I didn't make it now. I am so slow. I'm reasonably nice, though. Right, we'll keep reading. At Mrs. Bowen's impassioned cry, Chief Henson turned an appealing look upon the judge, who bowed his head as if understanding the mute question. He reached the fainting woman's side with one stride and lifted her tenderly in his strong arms. Then he bore her from the crowded room, followed by the maid and weeping stepsister. The spectators fell back respectfully before the stern man over whose white face great tears, that did not shame his manhood, coursed unheeded. When the excitement incident to Chief Henson's story, or Ellis Ensign as we must now call him, had somewhat subsided, the trial was resumed. Governor Lowe called no other witnesses, but at once rose to address the jury for the prisoner, and never, perhaps, had the great politician and leader been more eloquently brilliant than on that occasion. He ranged up the whole mass of evidence with a bold and masterly grasp that could not be outrivaled. In burning words, he laid bare the details of the plot for millions, explaining that when General Benson found himself defeated in all directions and threatened with exposure by the woman he had ruined if he persisted in marrying Miss Bowen, he had conceived the idea of a diabolical deed to murder Miss Bradford and allow the guilt to rest upon Cuthbert Sumner, thus ridding himself of two obstacles at one stroke. He painted vividly the stealthy return of General Benson from New York to Washington, his arrival at the Treasury Building, his concealment in the great wardrobes with which his department was supplied, his long wait for the departure of Mr. Sumner, during which he heard the dead woman's confession to the secretary, his meeting with Miss Bradford, down to the last awful move in the tragedy witnessed by the old negress Aunt Henny, who fainted with horror at the tragedy of the night. He returned to New York as secretly as he left the city, continued the governor, because his flight had occurred on the Sabbath when all the members of the committee were bent on individual pleasure, and as he was in his place on Monday morning, no one noticed his absence. Then, in his devotion to his employer's interests, the faithful servant and ex-slave, Isaac Johnson, knowing no law save the will of his former owner, faithful to the traditions of slavery still, concealed the only witness of the crime, failing only in one point, that he did not murder the old woman, his mother-in-law, as commanded by General Benson, but kept her in confinement. In attempting to force Miss Bowen to marry him by abducting her and concealing her in an old country house, detectives searching for her found the missing witness whom we have heard here today. The romance of the situation, romance is probably not used exactly in the way we're thinking of romance. Well, today anyway. Like I think of romance novels and love and all aflutter, but romance didn't. If we think about sorry, I lost my train of thought. If we think about a romance, for example, then we are thinking not just of love, but of intrigue and subterfuge and that sort of thing. So let's think about the word romance in that way. The romance of the situation is enhanced by the fact that in just retribution, the brother so inhumanly betrayed and abandoned, even as was Joseph of old, by his brethren, was the nemesis placed upon the criminal's track to put him in the power of outraged justice. And just as a sidebar, this Joseph of old, who was betrayed by his brethren, is referring to the Bible and the story of Joseph in the Bible. If you've heard of Joseph in the Coat of Many Colors, That's that Joseph and his brothers sold him into slavery. Yikes. It all worked out for his good, though. Eventually, he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." All right, back to the book. With a splendid peroration and a tender reference to the unexpected meeting of the cruelly separated husband and wife, the governor sat down, and the attorney general followed him in a speech of great ability. But he knew the verdict was a foregone one, that his own remarks were but a form, that the weight of evidence in this most extraordinary case left him but one course. He felt, too, a savage bitterness towards Benson or Ensign that made him pant for the trial which he knew must come. In fact, officers were already stationed near the precious trio, ready to take them in charge the moment all preliminary proceedings were over. Mm. The Attorney General concluded his speech with the words, "Justice is all that we are seeking, gentlemen of the jury, and in your hands I leave the prisoner's interests, knowing that you will return a verdict in accordance with the evidence given that will give us all the right to welcome Mr. Sumner among us again, fully reinstated in the confidence and esteem of the whole country." Okay, so I have been talking about what a miscarriage of justice this has been, and a travesty that he was not considered innocent until proven guilty, and that he had to find the person who actually killed the Miss, I forgot her name, Miss Bradford. But I'm also displeased with this. The attorney general just knew it was a foregone conclusion that the jury would acquit Sumner. And so he says, "Knowing that you will return a verdict in accordance with the evidence given that will give us all the right to welcome Mr. Sumner among us again, fully reinstated in the confidence and esteem of the whole country." Basically, he's saying, yeah, he's innocent, so you have to find him innocent. He negated everything that he had done. I mean, I'm not exactly mad at it, but this isn't how it's supposed to work. You present your evidence, and the jury looks at that evidence and thinks about it, and I hope they pray about it, and then they come to a conclusion. You don't decide for them what their conclusion should be. What are you, sir? What are you doing? Ah. The judge's charge followed with a finely balanced summing up which displayed all the power and glory of English jurisprudence. Even the prisoner followed him with admiring forgetfulness of self. Finally, the case was given to the jury. They consulted together a few minutes for the sake of appearance without leaving their seats. They didn't even go to a back room or anything. They were all just like, cool. I mean, maybe they didn't go back in some other room back in this time. I don't know. I wasn't alive then, and as I've never served on a jury, I know from what I see on TV. But you can't really deliberate in a courtroom. I guess they didn't deliberate. It was all for the sake of appearance, they say. Finally, the case was given to the jury. They consulted together a few minutes for the sake of appearance without leaving their seats. Then the foreman rose and announced, "We find the prisoner not guilty." "Is this your verdict, Mr. Foreman?" asked the clerk. "It is," he answered. "So you all say, gentlemen of the jury?" "We do," in a chorus from the box. If there had been much doubt which way public opinion and sympathy had set during the trial, there was absolutely none when the verdict not guilty was given. For the long repressed excitement found vent in an outburst of applause that for a time defied official control. Like wildfire, the news spread to the people outside, and cheer after cheer rent the air, the crowd swaying and pushing in a vain attempt to get a glimpse of the late prisoner. But as soon as he could, Sumner left in a carriage with Badger and West, faithful John Williams on the box, for his apartments and later the Bowen mansion. Sumner could never have told very precisely what passed after the verdict had been given, save that as in a dizzy dream he heard applause within and cheers without. Then he saw the fetters on the wrists of General Benson and saw him hurried from the room between two officers. That is always exciting to me. Like, oh, okay, never mind. I was about to ruin a movie for you, and maybe you've seen the movie, and maybe you haven't, but A Few Good Men. Anyway, this reminded me of a scene from A Few Good Men. That's all the ruining I'll do right now. Okay, then he saw the fetters on the wrists of General Benson and saw him hurried from the room between two officers, followed by Major Madison and Aurelia. The two villains had sat nonplussed and dumbfounded during the stirring events just chronicled, making no effort to escape. Governor Lowe rushed the business of their arrest, and this was ably seconded by the judge and the attorney general. Presently, Sumner found himself in a mass of humanity in a room with Governor Lowe and Mr. Cameron, receiving congratulations and invitations. He thanked all in his pleasant way and declined. He could not bear society just yet. The verdict gave back life to Jewel and to him, but he was unhappy and anxious over her situation with her stepmother. The wonderful revelation of Mrs. Bowen's identity with the slave Hagar was a shock to him. Was it really a wonderful revelation? Maybe. We'll see what he thinks about it. It was a delicate situation. Yes, because now everybody knows this white woman ain't white, which is the question we've had since the beginning of our tale, and the question we have in like everything that we read together. It was a delicate situation, but of course, he told himself, Mrs. Bowen could see that with all sympathy for her and her sad story, it was impossible for Jewel to be longer associated with her in so close a relationship as that of mother and daughter. Oh my gosh. So he's saying, well, now that we all know she's black, like I get it, but Jewel can't hang out with her. And that's her mama. I mean, her stepmama, although maybe we'll find out something different. I don't know. Mm, mm. He comforted himself with the thought that the unfortunate woman was the second wife of Senator Bowen, and that was a fortunate fact. Oh my gosh, is it a fortunate fact because he would be like, I can't marry Jewel now because she's black? Oh, I mean, that's not what he said, but I feel like that's what he was thinking. He would do all that he could for Mrs. Bowen, but the social position of Mrs. Sumner demanded a prompt separation. So now that she's Mrs. Sumner, oh, you can't have your white wife have a black stepmom, a stepmom who nobody knew was black from looking at her. Nobody. What makes one black? What makes one not black? And clearly, being not black in this instance does not make one white. Mm. Grr. Cuthbert Sumner was born with a noble nature. His faults were those caused by environment and tradition. That sounds like what's the book we read? House Behind the Cedars. Yeah, it's this green one right here. We read this one too recently. That's like what's his name in House Behind the Cedars, the guy who was in love with Rena. Let's see, what was his name? Rena's brother was John. I can't think of it. Anyway, this reminds me of the guy who was in love with Rena in House Behind the Cedars. Cuthbert Sumner was born with a noble nature. His faults were those caused by environment and tradition. Chivalrous, generous hearted, a manly man. Why do we keep talking about being a manly man? Chivalrous, generous hearted, a manly man in the fullest meaning of the term, yet born and bred in an atmosphere which approved of freedom and qualified equality for the Negro. He had never considered for one moment the remote contingency of actual social contact with this unfortunate people. And it apparently had him feeling some kind of way. He had heard the Negro question discussed in all its phases during his student life at Fair Harbor, and had even contributed a paper to a local weekly in which he had warmly championed their cause. But so had he championed the cause of the dumb and helpless creatures in the animal world about him. I champion the cause of the Negroes. I champion the cause of the animals in the zoo. They're all the same. He gave large sums to Negro colleges and, on the same principle, gave liberally to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and endowed a refuge for homeless cats. Horses, dogs, cats, and Negroes were classed together in his mind as a brute creation whose sufferings it was his duty to help alleviate. I mean, I'm not mad at him for wanting to help horses, dogs, cats, and Negroes. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. I was looking at where this chapter ends because I was like, I'm kind of tired. We've been at this for about 20 minutes. It's probably about time to stop. And then I saw like the shortest chapter in the world. The next chapter is crazy short. Next time we read, we're going to finish this chapter and the next chapter. The next chapter is only a page and a half. Anyway, back to Cuthbert Sumner. Horses, dogs, cats, and Negroes were classed together in his mind as of the brute creation whose sufferings it was his duty to help alleviate. And Jewel? She too felt that straining of the heart's cords as she waited in her private sitting room for her lover husband. She was alone. Ellis Ensign was with her stepmother. After Mrs. Bowen returned to consciousness, Jewel had stolen away unnoticed by the strangely reunited pair, leaving them in sacred seclusion. She held the evening paper in her hand. It contained a column headed "Sensational Ending of the Famous Bradford Tragedy." Like, really? How much more are we doing here? Okay, this is enough for right now. This is enough. We're going to stop with Cuthbert Sumner thinking that horses, dogs, cats, and Negroes were all classed together as of the brute creation whose sufferings it was his duty to help alleviate. And Jewel looking at a news headline saying "sensational ending of the famous Bradford trial." That's where we stop today. I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. See you next time.